Hi, welcome to the No More Sex Shame video series. This is a project where we are interviewing folks who have experienced forms of sexual shame in the past and how they overcame it. With us today is Dr. Joe Kort, who is a psychotherapist and sex therapist in Michigan. Joe, thanks for doing this.
Thanks for having me.
So Joe, as we've discussed, what I'm interested in hearing about is places or ways in which you have experienced or seen kind of sexual shaming in your life and your career, and what that was like for you, and how you beat it, how you overcame it.
Yeah, so I was thinking about this interview and thinking about what my process was. So I had come out early. Coming out was not easy as a gay man, but it wasn't really hard either. I could do it. I felt really strongly about it. I had a therapist help me. But erotically, sexually, so you come out sexually, your orientation, I knew I was attracted to men. But I also had an erotic identity that wasn't heteronormative, wasn't mainstream. And I decided, I go back and see what I did is I decided I was going to come out gay, and I did. I came out really early, and I decided if my sister was going to have a boyfriend, I would too. If she was going to bring someone home, so would I. I was going to be a heteronormative gay, if that's a thing, like I was going to live a normal gay life as a gay guy in a straight world, and that's what I did. And then I also did that though to myself erotically, where there was no room, I really didn't even see room for what I liked in the gay community. It didn't fit for me what I liked, the things I was attracted to. And I didn't know what I was going to do. And then it was the 80s, and HIV started spreading like wildfire. And that scared the hell out of me. And it was a very conservative time. We had Reagan in the office. It was just a really scary time. And so with that, I decided, I remember being in therapy and discovering sex addiction. And the work of sex addiction, and exploring it and deciding, this fits me. This is what I need. And I remember going back to my therapist saying, why didn't you ever tell me about this? And he said, I don't believe in it. I don't think that's for you. I think that you're just like maybe a kinky guy, or you just have a fetish taste or whatever. And I fired him. And I can't believe it, but I did. And I decided to go into sex addiction because it felt like it could help me cover up anything that wasn't heteronormative as a gay guy.
Wow, I'm not sure I ever heard that story. So your therapist said he didn't believe in sex addiction, and you fired him because that fit you better. Did it help? I mean, did it help you protect yourself from AIDS, for instance?
I don't know. I don't know that it did. I think it protected me to some degree. I'll tell you what it gave me for sure was a place to talk about my stuff. I remember going to the sex ed meetings and being able to talk at length about what I liked and what I did, even though everybody pathologized it, including me. I mean, it gave me voice. I was able to process it with other men in the room, and women even sometimes. And then I went to treatment for it. I went to a 30-day. I remember begging for 5 more days. Everybody was getting 36 days. I really wanted to be a sex addict. Let me tell you that. I worked hard for that label. I did. And, but it never really helped me. It never stopped my behavior. In fact, it made it worse. Because when I got home from treatment, now I'm 24 years old at the time, I went crazy, even further, progressing into what I thought was my sex addiction, and got even more involved in the things I like doing. Now looking back, I realize it's because I went away to a place that said, you have, like what Doug Barn Harvey talks about, I gave myself an eroticectomy, and I didn't want to. Really, there was a part of me that didn't want to, so I kept going out, and I look back, I had some really good times. I don't regret any of the early stuff I did. In terms of the sexual stuff, what I regret was trying to be a sex addict and believing that would help me.
So what happened when you became a therapist yourself?
So then I became a therapist. Oh, I already was a therapist. I've been a therapist since I was 22.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I've been doing this a long time. And I decided that sex addiction model was what was needed. I thought I saw a lot of sex happening in the gay male community, and I pathologized it. I didn't, and all the while though, I kept thinking, God, there's this other part of the gay community that's so sexually free and so open, and I pathologized that. I looked at it as negative, and because of HIV in part, and I don't know why I did it in other ways, but I did, and I went with the sex addiction model. I went to all the conferences, and at the conferences, the other gay therapists and I would get together on Saturday night for dinner every year, and we would all say, "This doesn't work. Is anybody really doing this in your office?" And we'd all say, "No, no," and I would too. But I'd say I do some of it, because what it did do is gave men a term to grab on and say, "Okay, at least this is something." And it would save a marriage, at least temporarily, because I've had wives in my office say, "I'd rather my husband be a sex addict than a pervert." And so everybody calms down with this title, even though it's the wrong title, and gives them a few minutes of relief.
So you keep using the word pathologizing around the way the sex addiction kind of approach views a lot of gay male sexual activity. Do you think that's the same thing as shaming, or was it different?
It was shaming. I was shaming myself. I shamed these men that came to my office. I'm sure I did, not on purpose. I mean, they came through to say, "I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this." And I can think of so many other clients that today, if they came to me, I would say, "Okay, I can help you look at not wanting to do this, but maybe this is you. Maybe this is just what you get into, and there's nothing wrong with you." This is what I say today. And but back then I didn't. I had them going to 12-step groups. I had them in a sex therapy. I mean, it wasn't sex therapy, sex addiction therapy, men's group, and I would say it was pretty shaming, because people would end up having to come back and admit that they had relapsed or fallen backwards into what they enjoyed doing.
What was a part of them and who they were.
And me.
So what changed? How did you end up where you are today?
So a few things happened. I don't know the order, but for sure, I don't think this is the right order, but this is all I started saying things in the sex addiction community, like, maybe this isn't wrong. Maybe, open relationships aren't wrong. And maybe it's okay to get into BDSM. And I started getting pushback from people within the sex addiction industry and the listservs. And I started being labeled by them as a provocative and, a troublemaker. And this was shocking to me, because they loved me in the sex addiction community, to the point where they were grooming me to be a supervisor. I'd been writing in their books, in their journals. I was the go-to gay guy and the go-to, guy to help with understanding what I thought was non-heteronormative things, but it wasn't. They only could accept me as a heteronormative gay man. The less I became, and the more non-heteronormative I became, the more they started distancing themselves from me. Then your book came out, and I read it. And I agreed with so much of it, and I didn't want to agree. I was so angry about it. I think I did a Huffington Post article, and I wasn't mean to you, I don't think, but I wasn't pleasant about it, right?
I was a little disappointed when you did that, because I had cited your dissertation in the book, and I remember reading your dissertation. It was one of the few places where I saw kind of anybody in the industry sort of acknowledging that there was this significant trend here to pathologize gay men. And I think your dissertation was about satyriasis and that the application of that diagnosis to gay men. And I thought it was just brilliant. And then when you published that, pretty scathing review, you weren't mean. There were other people that were being mean at the time. But I was just like, wow, okay. But I remember reaching out to you somehow. I remember I was driving back in Colorado for some reason, and had this long phone conversation with you, and was like, wow, Joe's a neat guy.
Because I always had a sexual health side. I always understood, but I couldn't allow myself to connect to that side. And sex addiction model doesn't want you to, so it worked perfectly. But okay, so I must have been in my PhD program first, if you read my dissertation and cited me, because it was that professor. I was 45 years old, and I remember him saying, "I don't believe in sex addiction, and if you're going to be in my program, we're going to have a problem." And I remember looking at him and saying, "Well, we're going to have a problem, because I do believe in it," only to be done with that program and done with the dissertation, because he said, if it exists, prove it. So then I did my dissertation. It was really just an overview of the literature review. And I couldn't prove it. There was no proof. And then that started to wake me up and say, maybe this just isn't right. Something's not right. And then I kind of remember our conversation, not really talking with you, but your book, my own, and then I was sort of moving toward my own midlife, and I was tired of shaming myself. I was tired of telling myself something's bad and wrong with you. My husband knows what I like. He's always known what I like. He's never had a problem. If I want to call it sex addiction, fine. If I want to go do it, it's fine. He's so unconditionally, I had an unconditional therapist and an unconditional partner, and I still conditionally loved myself and used this, what I would consider reparative therapy for erotica. It's reparative therapy, conversion therapy for somebody's erotic life. And that's what I was trying to do. And I got exhausted. And I finally said, this is who I am. This is what I like. This is what I do. I've always done it safely. Even when they were telling me I wasn't, and I was telling myself I wasn't in my 20s, I did. I was fine. And I knew I'd be fine by coming out. But I was scared to death, to be honest.
What was it like for you as you, both personally and professionally, as you started rejecting that shaming, and especially as you started rejecting the shaming that you've been put on yourself?
It was scary because I thought, what if, I'm always, it's still, if there's a tiny voice, hopefully it goes away, where I think they're sex addict therapists, right? Are they, am I going to fall? Am I going to have something bad happen to me? It's sort of like being raised Jewish. I was raised Jewish. My grandmother would say, oh my God, God is watching. Something bad's going to happen to you if you don't, like this religious sort of guilt-inducing. And so I think I just felt really afraid, but I also felt a lot of joy, a lot of sexual joy, and a lot of, I've been able to enjoy things that my own self, but my own clients, to be able to free them and say, come back to me and say, I've been rethinking this. And what do you think? What if we looked at this from a non-pathological lens? What if we don't shame you around this? What if there's nothing to be ashamed of? And those conversations in my office started to be different, and they were different for me, but the sex addiction community became increasingly intolerant of me and really berated me, degraded me, censored me. And finally, I decided that I wasn't going to be treated this way anymore. I mean, they would have probably been fine treating me this way because I paid a lot of money to be in that organization. It's a very costly thing to be, in the sex addiction industry if you want to be in that, right in it. And so I decided they don't deserve my money. I'm going to pull away. And I secured a support group. Actually, you helped me do, and others helped me do. I built a support group of people who understood because what I really wanted to do was be a sex therapist and a sex addiction therapist. And I wanted to find the middle. I kept trying to find the middle, and I couldn't. And that was the other thing. Sorry, I'm going on and on. But becoming a sex therapist also helped me get away from sex addiction, because in the sex addiction industry, there is zero sex therapy training. And I know that right now they're offering these 15-hour courses that are voluntary, that are not required. And they're saying, well, yes, we do offer. No, you don't. When you become a sex therapist, you're required to immerse yourself in understanding sexual health. The more I did, the more I realized this sex addiction stuff is not right. Are people sexually suffering? Yes. But are they suffering because of what they're doing, or are they suffering because of the messages they're giving themselves about what they're doing? And learning about normal sexuality was the best thing that could have happened to me and should be taught in the sex addiction community.
Learning about the diversity of normal sexuality, how broad it is compared to the little box that people want to put other people in sexually, and that we end up trying to put ourselves into.
Yes. Yeah.
So what would be your kind of message? One of the things I love doing these interviews, Joe, is that I get to everyone, I hear these different nuances and these different shades of people's experience with sexual shame, and I learn something. And, what I've learned today is the power that sexual shame had on you, that you were doing to yourself, that you had an unconditional therapist and an unconditional husband, and yet you were still shaming yourself. And I bet I bet there are lots of people out there that are doing this to themselves.
Yeah.
What would you recommend to them? How can they break that cycle?
I mean, hopefully going to a trained sex therapist who understands healthy sexuality and challenge themselves around this. It doesn't mean you have to lay down and go along with what somebody says to you, but challenge your beliefs, challenge your notions. In the sex addiction industry, you can't challenge them. I remember being one of them. If you challenged me, you challenged my recovery. And that's what happens to the sex addiction therapists. Most of them are in their own recovery. Either they're sex addicts, or they've identified, or they've been wounded by a sex addict. And so they're tugging or clinging to that. And there's no room to have this kind of dialogue. I would say that what worked for me was having a dialogue with people that didn't fight me and tell me I was wrong and bad, but instead could hear me, but then offer their side and have a differentiated conversation.
So looking at those pretty rigid kind of assumptions and values about what kind of sex is right, and being willing to explore or examine whether those are right, whether the box really is that small, or is it bigger? And if you make it bigger, can you stop shaming yourself because now you fit?
Right, and it's really like, it's the idea that for me what it was really just understanding that the way I like sex is the way I like sex, and it's right for me. It may not be right for you. It may not be right for others. It's right for me. It works for me. But I didn't know that because I was told over and over again by our society and the 80s and HIV and everything that it wasn't right. And I had to find out what was right for me and undo and get out of the way of all the rubble of what other people thought that I accepted and agreed with.
Where do you see things going from here? I mean, what do you think is on the horizon with all the changes that are happening around people acknowledging the danger of these messages around sex?
Well, I would think about this. As a gay guy, there was always these religious right people that would say, well, we can't allow for gays. If we allow for gays, then we're going to allow for pedophilia. Then we're going to allow for polyamory. Then we're going to allow for... And now that's kind of happened, right? Not that we allow for pedophilia, of course, but it's kind of happened. They were kind of right that if you allow for something, then it opens up opportunities to explore other things. And I said, what's wrong with that? Okay, so now, again, I shouldn't have said pedophilia. I don't mean that there is something wrong with that, and people have to monitor themselves or they're going to harm a minor. But most other things that people are getting into, there's really nothing wrong with another consenting adult. The internet has changed the game here. The internet has people talking about things you could never talk about. I could never find other people to talk about the things I liked until the internet. And I think things are going to change to the point where people are more and more open. But I think that sex addiction industry, to be honest with you, is going to become more and more conservative and more religious. I witnessed that. Because in the old days, when something anti-gay would be said in there, I would come out and say, this is anti-gay. And it would take a few weeks on the listserv, and then finally people would listen to me. That stopped. When I finally left, I found that no matter how I tried to fend off homophobia or, erotophobia, people overrode me.
I think one of the things that I've certainly heard you talk about is the issues of consent and paying attention to what are the healthy values for sex. And instead of identifying healthy sex as, what you do, it becomes more a question of kind of how you do it. And so instead of saying gay sex is wrong, instead helping people to identify for themselves, how are you doing this? And are you doing it in a way that you feel good about? If you are, good for you.
Yes, and are they your beliefs or what you were taught by your religion, your culture, your parents? That's what I had to unravel. What's right for me? That I can't tell you how liberating that was, and still is. As I say it right now, I have chills. I know what's right for me. I totally know what gets me off, and I want to help clients understand what gets them off, so that without the messages of everyone else, and then try to understand how is that going to manifest for them.
It gives me chills too, Joe. I mean, to just hear and see you talk about that level of self-acceptance and the freedom that you've gotten, I think it's beautiful.
Well, thank you. And I want to ever apologize to you, anything that I ever said to you that was negative, and to any client that I ever worked with. I feel really bad. Sometimes I feel like a reparative therapist felt when they were working with these psychoanalytically, these clients who would say, they finally had to turn to their gay clients and say, I'm wrong, you're gay, and I'm so sorry we spent all these years. And I feel the same way. I feel like I spent all those years. I think I did it with compassion. I did it with well intentions. I did it because that's what they wanted to, but I feel bad about it, and I'm sorry.
You know, it takes an incredible amount of ego strength to be able to admit that, and to acknowledge, and to say, hey, let's find a better way. Let's find a different way. And it's one of the reasons I really look up to you. Your ability, your maturity, your wisdom, to acknowledge, hey, maybe the world isn't flat.
Right.
So, well, thank you, Joe. This is wonderful. I really appreciate you doing this.
Thanks, and thanks for letting me do it.